Today we are continuing with Hunting for Hidden Gold by Franklin W. Dixon. When we last left the Hardys, they were in a wolf's den. Chapter 19, Wolf Prey. For a moment the Hardys were paralyzed with fright. Joe swallowed hard and whispered, "Can we make a break for freedom?" "We can try." At the first step, however, the huge timber wolf nearest them gave a savage snarl. The fur on its back bristled stiffly. Frank muttered, "One false move and that Lobo will go for us. This pack acts hungry." There was a patter of feet in the darkness. The glowing eyes from the dim recesses circled closer. The wolves were gathering around the boys, cutting off escape through the cave entrance. Frank could feel drops of cold perspiration trickling down his skin. "Snap on your flashlight too, Joe. It may help keep them back." Joe played the beam slowly back and forth while Frank used his. The wolves slunk restlessly to and fro. Their lolling tongues gave them a wickedly grinning appearance, but they were wary of the lights. Now and then, as the gaunt gray form was caught in the full radiance of a beam, the animal would leap back into the shadows. It was clear the flashlights would not hold the beasts at bay for long. As the wolves paced back and forth, the circle was being drawn gradually tighter. "Watch it!" Joe exclaimed suddenly. The leader of the pack was advancing straight towards Frank, who stabbed his light fully into the wolf's greenish eyes. The brute shrank back, its ears laid flat to its head. A vicious growl issued from its throat. Instinctively, the Hardys moved a step backward. The pack seemed to sense the boy's fear and pressed its advantage, forcing the Hardys to retreat even further. "Into the tunnel!" Frank told his brother. "It may be a blind alley," Joe warned. "We'll have to risk it. There's no other way out." Inch by inch, the boys backed towards the tunnel opening. "It's not wide enough for both of us," Joe said tensely, flashing his light quickly behind them. "Then you go first," Frank ordered. They were only a few yards from the tunnel now. Frank began working his way into position behind his brother. The wolves edged closer still, growing bolder, as if they sensed that their victims were trying to escape. Suddenly, the leader gave a vicious snarl and shortened his distance between the boys with a quick leap forward. Again, Frank focused his flashlight squarely into the huge beast's eyes. But this time, the wolf refused to shrink back. Frank's heart hammered as he saw the bared fangs and the slavering jaws. In an instant, he would leap in for the kill. "Quick, a rock!" Frank gasped. Joe looked around desperately and snatched up a heavy, jagged stone. He hurled it with all his might at the wolf. The rock hit the beast squarely in the head, and the wolf collapsed with blood oozing from the wound. A chorus of low growls rose from the pack. The wolves seemed cowed by their leader's downfall, but their nostrils had caught the scent of blood. "Run for it!" Frank yelled. Joe turned and plunged into the narrow passageway. Frank followed, but more slowly, keeping his light aimed at the wolves. The pack was gathering around its downed leader, sniffing and growling at the carcass. Suddenly, Frank heard a cry from Joe. It faded abruptly somewhere in the distance. "Joe, are you all right?" Frank glanced around hastily, but only saw darkness. A loud snarl drew his attention back towards the main cave. Glowing eyes were peering into the passage, as if the wolves were nerving themselves for a renewed attack. Frank backed away fast, hoping to keep them dazzled with the flashlight beam. Suddenly, the ground seemed to end. His foot encountered only empty space. In the next instant, Frank was plunging downward through a narrow hole. Instinctively, he doubled up and, a moment later, landed hard amid the dirt and rubble. Frank was breathless from the jolting shock. Luckily, he was still clutching the flashlight. He rolled quickly to his feet and played the beam around. A surge of relief swept over him. Joe was laying on the ground only a few feet away. He too had fallen through the hole, but had apparently retained enough presence of mind to roll clear before Frank fell on top of him. "Whew!" Joe struggled for breath. "Had the wind knocked out of me." As Frank helped him to his feet, he asked, "What about those wolves?" "Guess they won't bother us down here," Frank replied. He shone his flashlight up the hole, which seemed to be a natural chimney in the rock, but he could see nothing. Meanwhile, Joe was examining the area into which they had fallen. This too appeared to be a passageway, but larger than the one they had ducked into when escaping from the wolves. "Frank, look!" Joe exclaimed. What's the matter?" "Timbering." Joe's beam plucked out a few moldy uprights and crossbeams, still in position at intervals along the passage despite years of disuse. This place is a mine tunnel. You're right, Frank said, his voice quivering in excitement. This must be the tunnel of the Lone Tree diggings that Dawson told us about. Feels like cold air coming from over there, Joe said, glancing towards his right. A curve of the tunnel prevented them seeing more than 10 yards in that direction, but Joe reasoned, the entrance must be that end. Frank agreed and added, so the chamber with the bluish dirt walls would be the other way. Come on, let's find out. Shining their flashlights ahead, the Hardys plodded on. The tunnel was wide enough for them to proceed side by side, but at times they had to duck their heads to avoid bumping in on a crossbeam or low-hanging clump of rock. Presently, the boys' excitement grew as they noticed blue-gray streaks appearing in the earth of the tunnel walls. There it is! Frank cried suddenly. Far ahead, dimly revealed by the glow of their flashlights, the tunnel opened into a far wider cavern. The boys sprinted forward eagerly. As they burst into the underground chamber, Joe gave a low shout of triumph. The walls were covered with veined, bluish clay. This is the place, all right, Joe exclaimed. The Hardys excitedly shone their flashlights around the chamber. Several rusty picks and shovels lay scattered around, abandoned by the miners who had worked there many, many years before. The floor of the cavern was hard-packed, but in a few moments Frank and Joe discovered a heap of earth, which looked as though some time ago it had been dug up and then replaced. Grab a shovel, Joe, Frank said. I bet you this is where Dawson buried the gold. Let's see if it's still here. Both boys set to work. Though the spot was not rocky, the digging was difficult. Frank exchanged his shovel for a pick and began loosening the earth. He then switched to the shovel again and helped Joe scoop out the dislodged dirt and gravel. After several minutes, the Hardys were streaming with perspiration from the exhausting job. Boy, no wonder miners used dynamite. Joe took off his heavy jacket. Frank, too, removed his, and the boys returned to the digging. Their flashlights had been propped nearby to illuminate the spot. Suddenly, a yellowish-brown patch showed beneath the dirt. The boys frantically scraped and shoveled away the earth in a frenzy of anticipation. A moment later, they could make out 4 bulging leather pokes buried in the hole. As Frank beamed his flashlight into it, Joe tipped up a bag. Suddenly, one side of the rotting leather burst open, and gleaming yellow coins poured from it. The other bags held nuggets. Dawson and Onlow's gold, Frank cried out. The boys dropped to their knees, tense with excitement. Wow! Imagine how Mike Onslow will feel when he gets the news, Joe exclaimed. He never will, said a harsh voice directly behind the Hardys. Frank swung the flashlight around. Not 10 feet away stood a glowering man. Big Al, Joe gasped. That's right, the gang leader said, gave an ugly laugh. Thanks for finding the gold, kids. Too bad you'll never live to enjoy it.